Chapter 27. You told her? Snapped Link. You weren't supposed to tell anyone, especially not my sister. Link stood silent as he endured the dressing down by the old woman in the 6-year-old body. He had traveled with Simon back to Hateno Village, utilizing the teleportation rune's new capabilities. Purah had apparently gotten the rune to work on her own Sheikah slate. Beside him, Impa only laughed again, though Link could see tears in her eyes. Purah looked as if she were holding back her own emotions as well. Impa had decided that she would come with them, and before Link could mention the limitations of a single traveler limit on the runes, Simon nodded and instructed her to stand beside him. Paya had been left behind for the time being to ensure that no one would know that Impa had left the village. They traveled together to the hilltop overlooking Hateno Village, and Simon hurried inside to inform Purah of what had happened. Moments later, Purah had burst out from her laboratory, red in the face.
You've really gotten yourself in a mess this time, sister,
Impa said, moving forward. Link noticed that even with her back bowed, she stood a few inches taller than Purah, even not counting her pointed hat. And you got old, sis, Purah grinned at her sister, looking her up and down. How are you even still alive? Purah sniffled. So did Impa. And quite suddenly, the two women embraced tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Link watched the reunion for only a moment before growing uncomfortable and stepping away, soon joined by Simon, who wiped at his eyes beneath his glasses. I kept telling her that she should go see her sister, Simon said after a few moments, careful to keep his voice quiet. Once she got the rune working on her Sheikah slate, and we discovered that the activated shrines and towers were all available to travel to. She refused, though. Link nodded slowly, trying not to listen to the sounds of the reunited sisters behind him. It hurt him for some reason, and he could not place. Another hole in his mind where a memory should have been, perhaps. How did you transport Impa here? He finally said, looking over at Simon. Purah told me that it would only work for one person. Well, that was part of the reason that Purah asked me to go to Kollarcik Village. She figured that she would visit there, after you defeated the Goron Divine Beast, and wished to leave a message for you to make sure to visit her before going anywhere else. She wants to upgrade your Sheikah slate. She's managed to improve upon the teleportation rune in such a way that multiple beings are able to travel together now. Would it work with my horse as well? Link asked, hopeful. I am not sure. That would be a question best asked of Purah. I do not believe that was her intent, however. She has been working on that modification since you first arrived here. Link glanced back at the two sisters, who were still standing close to each other, speaking in soft tones. He wondered how long it had been since they last saw each other. Surely they had seen each other in the last century. Kakariko and Hateno were not so far from each other. A 3-day trip on horseback. Likely only 4 or 5 on a cart. From their reaction, though, it seemed to Link that it had been a truly long time indeed. He asked Simon, who shook his head sadly. I do not know. To the best of my knowledge, they have not actually seen each other since I began working with Purah. What has it been now? 16 years, perhaps 17? She tends to avoid speaking on such matters. All to ensure one of them would be safe and able to help me. He hated thinking about the sacrifices that everyone had been forced to make. Of course, he also knew that Impa would likely slap him again if he started dwelling on such things. In time, Purah and Impa parted, both wiping their eyes. When Purah finally spoke, her voice sounded hoarse. Well, come on. I've got some work to do, and I don't have all day. You're sure that it's going to work with my horse, too? Link asked, looking down at the Sheikah slate in his hand. Nothing appeared different than before, despite Purah's assurances. Linky? Yeah? You wouldn't be questioning my genius, would you? Link looked down at Purah, who glared up at him, with a look every bit as fierce as an adolescent girl could muster. He hesitated only a moment before finally saying, "No."
Good.
After a pause, she continued, "I promised that it would work. I even tested it on Mule. We arrived in one piece just fine, though he really didn't like appearing on top of a Sheikah tower. I don't recommend doing that with your horse. How close do I need to be standing next to him? You'll see. When you select the rune now, it will project a ring around you on the ground. You'll need to select it a second time for confirmation. Anyone in that ring will get teleported. Anyone outside won't." "And anyone halfway in?" Link asked. "Will have a very bad day." "Right. And I bet you're thinking about how you could use that in combat again, aren't you?" Link grinned down at Purah, who rolled her eyes. He strapped the Sheikah slate back onto his belt. "Really, Purah, this is great. It's going to make traveling a lot easier. Hopefully Spear doesn't throw me the first time I use it with him." "Snap. I hope he does." Impa snorted from her chair, where she was sipping a mug of steaming tea freshly brewed by Simon. She was sitting at Purah's table, which was covered, as always, by stacks of papers and several books. Purah whirled on Impa, sticking her tongue out at her. Impa sneered.
"Even when you weren't in the body of a child, I was always the more mature one."
"As if you don't remember the pranks we used to pull together," Purah said, looking impish. She climbed atop her own chair, which was taller than the others to give her easier access to the table. Impa lifted her cup to her mouth, taking a dignified sip before replying.
"I only seem to recall covering for you so you wouldn't get in trouble."
"Yeah, and I remember covering for you when you spent the night with that squire." Impa choked on her tea, and Purah cackled. Link suddenly found a series of diagrams on the table very interesting.
"That?"
Impa pursed her lips, glaring at Purah.
"Let's not speak of that to my granddaughter, shall we?"
"Yes, wouldn't want to corrupt sweet Paya," Purah said, nodding. There was a mischievous glint in her eye. "You'd better bring her here soon. I want to see my grandniece again. Now that I'm younger, I bet I can keep up with her prattling better." Their bickering continued for a time, but Link found that he enjoyed listening to it. Somehow, this felt like an accomplishment to him. Things had regressed far enough now, in his journey, that the sisters felt comfortable enough to abandon their self-imposed exile. Perhaps it was time to bring all three of the old Sheikah back together. He made his way around the opposing side of the table, sitting in a chair himself. "Did you get Robbie's letter?" he finally asked, interrupting what sounded like it could have been a fight waiting to happen. "Letter? No," Purah asked, looking over at Link. "I visited him in the Akala Highlands before heading to Death Mountain. He got your letter about me. He sent one back." "No, it never arrived." Purah shook her head. Then her eyes widened, and she looked at Link, horrified. "You didn't..." "I didn't what?"
"You did."
She buried her face in her hands.
"You told him all about my de-aging rune, didn't you?"
"Oh, well..." Link gave her a sheepish grin. "Yes." Purah picked up a pencil from the table and threw it at him. It spun past his head. "It's a good thing that you don't remember anything from 100 years ago. You clearly don't know how to keep a secret."
"That is a good point," Impa said. "But of your memories, Link, you seem different now. I assume that more have begun to return."
"Only a few actual memories, but I keep..." He didn't know how to put it into words. What did one call the uncertain knowledge of having been someplace before, without the actual memory of having done so? Visiting Zora's domain in Goron City helped.
"And the photographs?"
He touched the Sheikah slate at his waist, his mind traveling back to the memory from the Spring of Power. He kept his expression as neutral as he could manage. "They're helping too, I think." "Good. I'm pleased to see that your memories are beginning to come back to you. The princess will be as well." Silence fell between them for a moment before Purah grinned, slapping her palm down on the table. "This is going to work, isn't it?" She looked between Impa and Link. "I mean, Linky has already taken out 2 of the divine beasts." "Yes," Impa said, setting her tea down on the table and leaning forward to look at Link. She steepled her fingers.
"Which brings up an important question, Link. What of the Master Sword's location? Any memory that might shine a light on where the princess may have hidden it?"
"No," Link exhaled, looking down at his palms. I don't have anything that might suggest where it is. He would need it soon. Too soon, perhaps. Impa pursed her lips, looking thoughtful.
I had hoped that it would have revealed itself to you, but I am sure that she is right. The princess was adamant that it would be revealed at the right time.
He remained silent for a time, struggling to truly comprehend those words. Just like when she'd spoken of it before, it felt naive. I hope you're right, he finally said, because I don't want to have to test whether or not Robbie's sword is going to be able to cut it against Ganon. Purah snorted, bursting into a fit of giggles.
Did you mean to say that?
Link looked at her, nonplussed. What? Cut it?
Oh, by the heavens above,
Impa said, sighing. Link opened his mouth, but then shut it. His lips turned up, forming a small smile. You have a pretty sharp ear to be able to catch that. Purah's eyes widened, a grin forming on her lips.
Linky, I think I'm beginning to like you. You never struck me as a punny guy before. Oh, he was, Impa said, groaning. And they were always terrible. He just only told them to the princess because she was the only one who would laugh at them.
And Mipha. I told them to Mipha too. And Daruk. Daruk could never understand them, and Mipha always seemed shocked when I would blurt one out. Link thought, a lump forming in his throat. Brief memories flashed through his mind. Daruk scratching his head. Mipha's eyes widening, lips forming a surprised "oh." Zelda. Princess Zelda snorting, trying to hide a smile behind her Sheikah slate.
Because of his memories returning. Because if not, then that might suggest that personalities are more to do with nature rather than environment. Perhaps personality and memories are not nearly as closely tied as one might expect.
Link noticed that Purah was scribbling some notes onto a piece of paper on the desk, speaking aloud as she did so. Link cleared his throat, trying to clear the flashes of memory from his mind. Maybe the three of you should reunite.
What?
Purah looked up, squinting at him. Impa was looking at him as well, eyebrows raised. That's what Robbie's letter said. He wants to meet with the both of you, and I think you should too, Link said. Impa nodded. I know you've stayed apart all this time to help me, but... He looked away, fixing his eyes on a point on the wall. As I regain more memories, I wish I had more time to spend with the friends that I lost.
Oh, now he's spouting off wisdom. That's definitely new.
Purah went back to scribbling notes on her paper. Impa ignored Purah, still looking at Link.
I think you are likely correct. We need to begin planning. It seems to me that in another couple months' time we may be facing the prospect of rebuilding a kingdom.
2 months? Purah said, looking up.
Snap. That doesn't give me much time, Impa.
Impa leveled another of her hawkish stares at her sister. Purah sneered, but then shrugged. I guess we should, huh? Since Linky here already spilled the beans on my secret. She shot him a glare. Not really any point in hiding anymore either. Impa tapped the side of her teacup with her index finger.
We cannot have the meeting in CalebCollinsVO Village, however. If we do house a spy, then it would not do to have them notice our gathering.
Purah shrugged. We can do it here. I'm way up on a hill. We'd be able to see someone coming for miles. Loop Slips over here activated a shrine near the old lighthouse, according to my map. I can send Simon to fetch him whenever we want to meet up.
Next week?
Impa nodded, finishing the rest of her tea.
Next week.
She eased off her seat.
I need to get back to CalebCollinsVO Village before anyone notices my absence. I suppose I will be forced to walk down from the hill, won't I? She scowled. That's inconvenient. It would be impossible for me to hide that I left the village.
It is for now, Purah said, an excited light in her eyes. I'm working on another invention that will let us create new teleportation points. I'm calling it the Travel Medallion. It doesn't work yet, but it's getting closer, I think.
Which doesn't help me now,
Impa said, sighing. Link reappeared an hour later, upon the Sheikah shrine inside Hateno Village, feeling disoriented as the village appeared before him. I don't think I've ever traveled so much by Sheikah slate in one day, have I? Maybe it was beginning to take its toll on him, or maybe he was just exhausted. He had been in Goron City just earlier that morning. He stepped down from the steep incline, his equipment feeling heavy on his back and shoulders. He could make out his house from here, sitting just across the ravine. He began to make his way towards the bridge. Link? He stiffened at the voice. He hadn't heard it in quite some time now. Turning, he spotted Telma standing near a couple of other women that seemed to have gathered near one of the wells in town, right next to the general store. She looked at him with wide eyes, clearly having not expected to see him slinking out from behind the silo. The tall, red-haired woman suddenly grinned, hurrying around the surprised women, wrapping him in a tight embrace. "Boy, it's good to see you." She pulled back, holding him at arm's reach. "Look at you. You look like you've been to hell and back since I last saw you." "Not hell, just Death Mountain," Link said, lips twisting into a wry grin. Telma laughed, the sound of her voice echoing off the stone buildings around them. "You're going to have to tell me about that one. I've been hearing all sorts of tales about you, and if half of them are true, then I'm impressed." Link gave an embarrassed smile, but Telma patted his shoulder. "Where are you going? Are you staying in the inn? I hadn't seen you." "No, I have a house here." He pointed towards the house across the ravine. "You have gotten around since we last spoke. Why don't you tell me about it? I'd love to hear it in your own words rather than the exaggeration that are being passed around town." "They're talking about me?" Link grimaced. News traveled very fast indeed. "Well, with that Rito bar at the inn, you're bound to be talk of the town." "Kass?" She chuckled. "Well, there's one bet that I lost. I bet the old sage that he'd never even met you." "Oh, we've met, and most of what he's saying is actually probably true." She quirked an eyebrow. "Oh, come on. Why don't you drop off your things and you can tell me all about it? Show me your house while you're at it. I need to make sure you're taking proper care of yourself." Link reluctantly led Telma back over to his house, opening the door and letting her go in before him. He walked over, pulling the equipment off of him with a sigh, resting everything against the wall. He walked up the stairs to the loft, opening the 2 shutters to let in some of the daylight from outside. The light revealed a largely empty room. The lower floor was large and spacious, but had no furniture in it. Instead, it contained a few odds and ends. The shikabo that he'd received from Kakarika Village, an extra bedroll, a few spare cooking implements. A fireplace had been built into one of the walls, and it contained a few old logs from the last time he had been here. Upstairs was slightly better. He had a bed at least, as well as a small chest. He'd put Mifa's armor in this for the time being. There was little else to the house, though it did have a spare room directly underneath the loft. That room was empty. Telma looked around, lips pursed tightly. "You don't live here," she said, when she finally looked at him. "Yes, I do," he insisted, walking back down from his loft. "No, you squat here. There's a difference." He shrugged. "I really haven't spent a lot of time here. He looked around the small home. Why couldn't he remember anything from this house? Had he not grown up here? Or at least spent some time living in these very walls? I needed a place that I could come back to, keep extra gear, a bed of my own." "Well, I certainly can relate to that," Telma said, her expression softening. "Still, though, you need to do more to make this place your own. Have those carpenters make you a table, for Din's sake." She looked over at his shikabo, picking it up with a thoughtful expression. She held it out, placing it against the wall over his mantel, as if to see how it looks. "It's a very nice house. An old one, though. Why not choose one of the newer places? Those come furnished." "Well, it was definitely cheaper for one," Link said, smiling at the memory. He hadn't known what to make of Bolson. "And the house, He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling his throat suddenly constrict. "It belonged to my family once, before everything happened." "Oh, Link." Telma set the bow down and walked over, wrapping her arms around him tightly. He stood there, allowing her to hug him, trying to control his breathing. Is this what a mother's embrace might feel like? He'd surely experienced it before, hadn't he? Telma finally pulled away. She gave him a sad smile. "It's a lovely home. I can see why you would want it." He forced himself to nod, but still did not trust himself to speak. She patted his shoulder and then turned, inspecting the bare walls. She turned and walked up the stairs, looking at the loft. Link walked over to his discarded equipment, bending down and beginning to rummage through his small pack. He wasn't really looking for anything in particular. He really just wanted to give his hands something to do. Now this is nice. What a great view. Her words floated down from the loft. You can see for miles from here. Her head peeked over the banister. Why don't you come up here for a moment? He stood from his pack, walking up the stairs. Thelma stood by the window that faced west. She motioned for him to approach. See the smoke column? He frowned and looked out the window. It took him several seconds, but he eventually saw the distant haze that she was indicating. It looked to be far away, 10 to 20 miles at least, maybe more. Link frowned. For him to be able to see the smoke from that distance, it had to be a large fire, or many fires. There's a big group of bokoblins and moblins gathering there. Have you seen them? It clicked in Link's mind. The Sheikah Tower. He'd seen the groups of monsters surrounding it the first time coming to Hateno Village. He hadn't used the road to leave the village since, so he had not had the opportunity to look that closely since. They've grown in number. They have. She pursed her lips. It's got some of the villagers concerned. They can fight off a small incursion. No one can survive around here without being at least somewhat prepared for the occasional raid, even if they rarely happen this far away from central Hyrule. But that's a big group. Bigger than any I've ever seen in one place. A chill ran down Link's spine. Why do you think they're gathering there? He asked, squinting. After a moment, he pulled out his Sheikah slate, using the telescope rune to get a better look. It didn't help much. The distance was too great and the land wasn't shaped in such a way that gave him a good view. It did give him a better idea of the scope of the camp, though, as he took in the sight of the smoke. Dozens of campfires, at least. I don't know. They usually stick together in small bands. Maybe they're trying to form some kind of settlement. Link shook his head. No. If they wanted to do that, they would use the vacated Hyrule field. He thought back to his first meeting with Thelma. She had been surprised to see the bokoblins attacking so far past the dueling peaks. They weren't supposed to be here in large numbers. It's an army, he finally said, heart sinking. That's what I'm afraid of. He closed his eyes. An army of bokoblins and moblins. Hundreds of them, most likely. A small army, but against a bunch of farmers? It would be disastrous, even if the superior number of Hylians living in and around Hateno Village were able to fight them off. The villagers might be better equipped. Bokoblins had rarely had more than wooden clubs from what he had seen, but they had not often been forced to fight over the last 100 years. The individuals that volunteered to watch at the gate were a clear example of that. If the monsters were to attack as a unified force... They'll start raiding. Link released a held breath. Even if they're not here to attack the village, they probably won't have the means to work the land and store food. With that many of them in one place, hunting will become scarce there quickly. I can't imagine that they're good at preserving resources. His mind raced as he considered what would happen. They were maybe a day away by road, less if they cut across country. They could expand easily enough, cut off the road west. There were enough narrow canyons to make it easy. If they did that, Hateno would be isolated. The village didn't rely on trade, though, to survive. They grew their own food, and there were plenty of fields and forests around for hunting. They even had direct access to the sea, so fishing was also viable. The problem would be when autumn and winter came. That's when the bokoblins would start growing hungry. They would either start attacking each other, or they would start attacking the village, raiding the food stores, killing. It made him sick. The villagers need to prepare. They are. He looked at Thelma, taking in her grim expression while she spoke. They've been watching them closely. The blacksmith has been hammering out some weapons. It's slow going, though. He's their only blacksmith. The other one died a few months ago. He's got some apprentices. I think that their woodsmen have started clearing some of the surrounding forests, too. There's been talk about building a wall. Good. That would help. A wall with raised platforms for archers would level the field. Still, though, the sheer size of the smoke column worried Link. Would it grow? The wall could protect those who lived in the village. But what of the outlying families? The farmers that lived away from the village? They would be especially vulnerable. especially as the monsters started looking for additional sources of food. And if the farms were lost, then, well, food scarcity could quickly become an issue. Link felt worry bubbling up into the pit of his stomach. Could he stop this somehow? Could he deal with an army of bokoblins? He was skilled in a fight, yes, but that was beyond any effort of just one man. Maybe I can talk to the Zora and the Gorons and the Sheikah. They can lend help. Of course, they were each recovering from their own respective disasters, but surely they could provide some kind of assistance. Good idea. Telma squeezed his shoulder, pulling back from the window. Come on. I didn't mean to get you worked up about this. You've got enough on your plate as it is. Why don't you tell me what you've been up to? Link allowed himself to be dragged out of the house to the inn as the day turned to evening. As he and Telma made their way through the town, they drew stares from the normal villagers. It made sense. Telma was an outsider, clearly Gerudo-blooded now, but Link knew better what to look for. And he was, well, him. It didn't bother Link as much as he thought it would, though perhaps he was just getting used to the stares. It was a rowdy night at the inn. Half of the town seemed to have shown up, crowding around the tables and harassing Prima and the other staff. Link saw why as soon as he had entered. Along one side of the inn, the tables had been pushed away to form an open area. Kass stood in the center of this clear spot, his concertina held in his feather hands. Link! A sudden female voice from the crowd. Several people, including Kass, looked up as Nat stood up from one of the tables, hurrying towards him. Megan, who sat next to her, stood up as well, though she approached more reservedly. Popular with the ladies, it seems, Telma intoned beside him, nudging him with her elbow. He felt his cheeks grow warm as Nat reached him, wrapping her arms around him in a quick embrace. Megan approached after Nat released him, and Link gave her a quick hug as well. The next several minutes were an awkward bunch, as some people broke into a cheer, apparently inspired by Kass' stories of his victory at Zora's domain. Others murmured amongst themselves, shooting him wide-eyed glances. If it weren't for the two sisters and Telma, he likely would have found a way to excuse himself. The sisters were excited to see him, however, and were happy to leave their table behind to go to an empty table off to one side of the room, closer to where Kass still played. Telma excused herself for a time to go speak with Sage, the man who ran the dye shop. Eventually, the commotion died down, and people stopped coming over to greet Link when Kass picked up playing another song, drawing the attention back to him. He didn't play a song about Link, gratefully. He wasn't sure how he felt about Kass telling people who he was. On one hand, it harkened back to what Impa had told him about wearing the champion's tunic. It might have brought hope to the people. On the other hand, it may also have drawn the attention of the Yiga, not to mention Link's disdain for the public eye. I think you choose the wrong profession if you don't want people to know who you are, Nat said in between bites of her meal, which Link noticed contained a large helping of truffles. He hadn't spoken to them of the Yiga, instead commenting on the fact that it was getting difficult to go anywhere without people knowing who he was. I understand, though. Megan sat next to Link, nursing a nail between her hands. She seemed to be shyer now that Link's true mission had been revealed. It must be uncomfortable to always be in the spotlight. I'm starting to get used to it, Link said, watching Kass as his sonorous voice rang out over the melody. Well, you'd have to. People are going to find out when someone is going around saving the world. Nat angled her fork towards Link. And that's pretty much exactly what you're doing. Is it all true? Megan asked. That you saved the Zora? And that you're trying to kill the Calamity? Link nodded. What about the princess? Link looked around at her. What about her? What had Kass been saying about them? Princess Zelda? Well, the stories that he's been telling say that you used to travel with the princess as her knight, and that you're trying to rescue her so that you can restore the kingdom. Restore the kingdom? Link thought, brows furrowing. He had rarely even considered that as a part of his mission, despite what the others thought. It seemed clear, though. If he defeated Ganon and rescued Princess Zelda, she would surely wish to be crowned queen of the land. It was her birthright. But what would his role be in that? He realized that Megan was still waiting for an answer. Oh, well, yes, I'm really just trying to take things one step at a time. Before she could say anything else, Prima brought over another mug of ale and set it down in front of him. He hadn't asked for it, but then again, he hadn't asked for the one he was currently drinking either. Someone else in the bar had bought it for him. The conversation left the subject of Link's adventures, which he was grateful for. He found himself enjoying the company even more when Telma rejoined them several minutes later, carrying a tankard of her own. The sisters knew Telma, it seemed, and immediately began to ask her about her own travels and what exotic items that she had brought with her. Link's eyes wandered back over to where Kass was, accepting a few rupees from one of the villagers. He pocketed them in his money pouch and set his concertina down in its case, latching it closed. It was apparently time for him to take a break. Excusing himself from the table, Link stood and approached Kass, who smiled broadly in the way of the Rito. "Link, I had not expected to see you tonight. How goes your journey?" "Well enough," Link said, moving to the wall and motioning for Kass to come closer. He glanced around, but no one was close enough to hear them, though most in the room were watching with keen eyes. "I need to know, though, have you been telling anyone that I was traveling to the Gorons?" "Oh, not at all. I felt that it would be prudent to leave out the specific details of your future endeavors, lest any unsavory folk get the wrong idea." "Good, because I had some run-ins with those unsavory folks on the road to Death Mountain. They tried to kill me." "Oh dear." The Rito looked concerned, beak opening and closing rapidly for a moment. "I hope that my songs haven't—" Link shook his head. "No, they apparently hold a bit of a grudge against me." Kass listened intently, as Link told him about the attack on his life, as well as the two suspected Yiga awaiting him to come down the mountain. "I think I'm going to transport myself and my horse to Kakariko Village, and leave from there, cut across Hyrule Field." Kass nodded, but then his eyes widened. "So you mean you have freed Varudanya, then?" At Link's nod, he exclaimed, "Excellent! You must tell me all about it." "Are you going to make a song about it?" "Of course," Kass winked at Link. "Or perhaps a verse, one for each of the divine beasts." I chose the wrong profession indeed, Link thought with a wry smile. There was nothing to do about it, though. Asking Kass not to sing would be like asking Azora not to swim. It was who he was. And what about me? Did I ever truly have a choice in my profession? Link led Kass back to the table, sitting back down next to Megan, and launched in the story of what happened on Death Mountain. As he told the story, Link noticed that several other villagers at the end were leaning close to hear him. Feeling increasingly self-conscious, he rushed to the end. Later, Link sat on the grass outside of his house, sliding a whetstone along the length of his silver sword. Kass sat beside him, tuning his concertina, and humming softly to himself. Telma had remained at the inn, and the sisters had bid Link a good night as they left. Kass had asked to accompany Link for a time, however, but hadn't told him why yet. Distantly, he could make out the slight orange glow from the fires near the tower. Kass looked down at him. "Hmm? Did you fly near the tower when you were arriving in Hateno Village? Did you see the gathering monsters there?" "Ah." Kass looked up, focusing on the distant glow. "I did not fly too close for fear of archers, but yes, I did. I provided what I knew to the villagers. It did not look as bad as it might initially appear. From what I could see, the camp is very disorganized." That was something, at least. Perhaps the gathered mass would turn to infighting, long before they grew desperate enough to attack Hateno Village. He could hope. Silence fell between them again for a time before Kass spoke again. "I hope that you do not mind my asking, but which divine beast do you intend on traveling to next?" Link looked up from his sword maintenance, meeting Kass's eyes. For the briefest of moments, he thought about the assassins that were after him. Then he pushed such thoughts from his mind. Kass was clearly not associated with the Yiga clan. "I'm going to cross Hyrule Field to visit your people next." "You intend on avoiding the assassins on the road, I take it?" Kass gently set his concertina back on its case. Link sighed heavily, nodding. "Impa from Kakariko Village fears that there may be Yiga spies among the Sheikah, so we intend on letting it slip that I will be going to the desert next. They should expect me to take the road west." "A wise plan." And even if they determine you fooled them, it will be more difficult to track in the field. Wild horses roam several places in the field. Of course, so do other creatures. I must warn you that many of the old towns have become havens for all sorts of monstrosities. I don't mind sleeping under the stars. Of course not. But you must be careful still. Not all the creatures that make Hyrule Field their home hunt during the hours of the day. That sounded ominous. Grimacing, Link opened his mouth to ask Kass more about what he meant, but the Dorito spoke again before he could. My friend, I wish to ask you if you would permit me to travel alongside you to my village. I had planned to fly to the desert myself, but I must confess that the troubles with the Zora and Goron divine beasts have set my feathers on end. I would like to see my wife and children again to ensure that they remain safe. Link frowned up at Kass. Are you sure? I'm being hunted by assassins, and I'm sure that you could cross the field much more quickly than I will be able to. Indeed I could, but this way I might be able to provide you a service. I have flown over the field and recently. I know where many of the troublesome areas are, and I will be able to act as a guide for you. Link couldn't deny how helpful that would be for him. Kass could provide him early warnings of monsters and guardians, while also letting him know if they were being followed. Even better, Kass might be able to spot an ambush lying in wait. He would be a fool to reject this offer. Listen, I'm not going to ask you to do this, but if you are offering, then I can hardly refuse. He hesitated. But if it gets bad, I want you to get out of there. Fly home to your family. Kass reached out, gripping Link's shoulder firmly. Of course, my friend. My calling is not of battle. I fear that I would only provide a hindrance to you in such a situation. Link smiled up at the Dorito, already grateful for his companionship. Traveling through Hyrule Field was going to be difficult and dangerous enough as it was. Perhaps with Kass's help, it would not have been as bad as he'd expected.